Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Marcellus Central School District Board of Education meeting for this evening, Monday, April 19th, 2021. This time I would ask that everyone please stand and join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on tonight's agenda are presentations. Mrs. Brantner.
Well, good evening, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be back together. It's been a little while. So we do have a few things to go over with you this evening. I think one of the downsides of not having a meeting for a while is that we end up having a lot of information to share. So first and foremost, I'll update you on our return to school planning and how the progression is going. I know some of you have children that have been experiencing this progression, so you may have some firsthand accounts of what's going on. But as of last Monday, the 12th, although funny story, I did a video today, and at the beginning of the video, I said, today is Monday, April 12th. So it clearly is not, it's the 19th. But as of Monday, April 12th, all of the K through 8th grade students who are interested in being back to school 5 days per week are back to school 5 days per week. And so all is well with them, and things seem to be going smoothly. And then, of course, our 9th through 12th grade students will return 5 days a week beginning next week on Monday, the 26th. And I think they're ready to go as well. So originally, when we did this progression, we set up testing for the first few weeks. At that time, I wasn't really certain if, in fact, parents and families may want testing for their children, just as an extra safety precaution. As you know, most of our staff is vaccinated at this point, and those that aren't have made decisions for certain reasons to not be. So we wouldn't really have many, if any, staff needing testing at this point. And the testing ended up being canceled. You know, people just weren't interested in it. I think, to me, that's a sign that they feel like things are going in the right direction here. Our athletic testing is still ongoing. Obviously, it was initially required by the county, strongly recommended by the county. And of course, the New York State Ed Department then put out a decision, I think that probably the day after that guidance came out, or maybe the week after, stating that it could not be a criteria for participation. So I think there's been some conflict across the area, but we're continuing to test. Most athletes are taking us up on that offer, and we will continue into the spring. Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah, so it says recommended for high-risk sports. I know we're just leaving, was it fall 2 season and started, are there any high-risk sports in the spring season?
Yes, men's lacrosse.
Lacrosse.
Yeah, no, sorry. Men's lacrosse. And at this point, Mike and I feel like we're going to continue offering testing. If other athletes get tested, you know, it seems a little weird where it's like, no, you know, you can't get tested. You know, some people may want their athlete to be tested or teams to be tested. So I'm sure we'll have lots of people still testing. So we're still doing 1 hour delay on Wednesday. That's going on at least till the end of April. I'm looking next Tuesday when we have our admin team at potentially figuring out an expiration date for those delays. I'm just giving time for the 7th through 12th contingent to get the kids back and just make sure they're feeling good and solid going forward. So I think we'll be able to stop having that at some point before the end of the school year. That'll be a good middle ground to alleviate some of the strain on especially the parents of younger children. It becomes a little bit chaotic probably for them on Wednesdays with daycare situations in the morning if they're headed off to work. And then, of course, we're doing our last Wednesday where our B cohort at the high school will be in attendance for an in-person day. And then after that, they'll be back 5 days a week if they choose to be. So I wanted to give you a look at where we sit in terms of who's virtual and who's not virtual. So at KCH, we're going to be, as of Monday the 26th, down to only 29 students remaining virtual. That number was obviously significantly higher, and we've seen some trending of returning to school full-time from that group. I think, some people wanted to be sure that we could pull it off and have it be, a safe situation. So I think now that we've been doing a great job down there and seeing that things are going smoothly, I know we have 3 more that are coming back, like I said, as of Monday the 26th. At DMS, we still have 50 students remaining virtual. I feel like we hit a high somewhere in the high 70s, close to 80. So that number is going down. And then the high school, we still have 100 students remaining virtual. Once 5-day-a-week starts, or that was announced, we had 13 more transition over. I don't remember what our high was, but it had to be over 120 at one point.
131 at the highest.
131, okay. So you can see that we are trending in the right direction in terms of making people feel enough comfort here with what we're doing to return. I think obviously you have contingents that are keeping their children virtual for a variety of reasons. Some folks still do have medical concerns going on in their family. There's probably still physicians that have not allowed some folks to be vaccinated as a result of underlying medical conditions. And in some cases, we have children that have a hard time with transition. There still is fear of quarantine, and this at least is a known entity. Every day I know what my child will be doing, and he or she knows what they're doing. So we're doing our best to continue to support those folks and make sure that their children have a good experience while they're away from us. So about a week ago, the New York State Department of Health finally came out with some guidance. I think you probably recognize, and anybody watching tonight may or may not, there's some lag time between the CDC making some grand announcement about a new guideline and sometimes our governor announcing a new guideline on one of his press conferences, and then actually having that trickle down and there being guidance from the New York State Department of Health to support that. I've said from the beginning, we're taking direction from several agencies. So this can be a little crazy sometimes because often when those announcements occur, we also have our county executive following up with some announcement. And of course, our public is left thinking that this is like flipping a switch and everything's different tomorrow. And it doesn't really work that way. So there were some surprises in the New York State DOH guidelines that I personally did not see coming. So the first was they are no longer recommending barriers, which is a huge departure from we're going to have barriers all over the school. And obviously we were a school district that decided we were going to jump on this first because it was just time to get kids back to school. And fortunately, we didn't get too far into that plan with acquiring barriers. We did acquire the first allotment, but we didn't have to take the rest of them, if you will, because we did see this coming. Once Ryan McMahon made his announcement, we saw the writing on the wall there. So the thought that was quoted in their guidance is that it may be thought that barriers actually restrict airflow. And obviously there's ventilation standards in classrooms, and they're looking for a certain number of air exchanges. And of course, if airflow is restricted, that can sort of have a negative effect on that particular, critical aspect of safety. So obviously not a big deal for us until you start talking about lunch, because the other surprise was language using the word must. You must maintain 6 feet while eating and unmasked, which obviously we were not doing. We are currently with barriers at 3 feet having lunch in classrooms, largely because you can't have it both ways. You can't put half the kids in the cafeteria and half the kids in the classroom and have enough people left over to actually supervise all of that. So we, unfortunately, I'm not going to go back and close school down. We're going in a really good direction finally. So I tasked Katie and Bob with figuring out a new plan for lunches that would get us closer to this must language. And so they did a phenomenal job. It was less than a week. I think I said we'll be back in touch in 3 days. That was on Tuesday. We had a meeting last Friday. They had a good plan. We have 4 of our bus drivers that have stepped up to help us in the middle of the day, which is fantastic, providing supervision that we need in the cafeterias. And I know Bob did meetings today with his teacher groups in the building and shared the plan with them so that they could all begin to figure out who's staying in the classroom and who's going to the cafeteria. The reality is, we're not going to do anything too scientific or crazy. Half the kids are going to stay in the classroom and half the kids are going to go into the cafeteria. And we really need consistency with who stays in the classroom and who stays in the cafeteria. I know that we may have people that want their children to experience the cafeteria, but I will again be asking for, or people that say, please don't let my child experience the cafeteria. It could go both ways. We really need some grace in that this is just complete craziness constantly for us. Just when we think we have a plan, we have to rewrite the plan. And so I think we can successfully rewrite this plan. You know, God bless Katie and Bob for their crazy hard work on this. But we have a plan. We're going to be able to comply with the guidance and we'll be able to move our barriers along. So the other thing that the New York State Department of Health finally addressed was actually the music portion. They had addressed physical education, reducing the social distance from 12 feet to 6 feet, but they had not touched music. And this took, I know I wrote one of my famous emails to all the county people that will listen. And I know that we actually had one of our superintendents who's an officer in the New York State music group, you know, like the New York State Public High School Athletic Association has a group. NISMA has a group as well. And he's one of the officers, maybe the president of that group. But he was doing advocating at the state level. So finally, this was addressed. And we were able to meet with our music teachers and come up with some plans, but they were really happy to see this addressed so that some of the planning we had done, they don't have to worry about all the finagling of just trying to get kids in a room to play some music. So that, I think, is going in a really good direction amidst a little bit of chaos there initially. So the other thing that we've been trying to work on altering is our morning drop-off. We had left a very broad window of time for parents and buses to drop off our K-6 students, and that's really impeded upon some morning planning, prep, and meeting time for the teachers in that grade level band. So our goal was if we could pull off the 5 days a week and get a sense of how the morning's looking, we might be able to crunch that time a little bit more. So we're going to start an experiment next week. Please keep us in your thoughts, where we start to crunch that time a little bit just to recoup some of that time, especially, you know, with all the changes. I know that the staff here, this is a contractual thing that our staff has given up, you know, all year, if you will, to help. And they've been gracious and wonderful about doing so. And we're just trying to find a way to help recoup some of that time, because obviously if you've ever taught, you know how important planning time is and having meeting time. This is a hot time for us to have teacher support team meetings where we're really talking about students that are struggling, and it's hard not to have that time, you know, when teachers are having to be in classrooms supervising students instead of doing some of those things. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it will be a success. So, Mike, did you have another question? Oh, sorry. Okay. So quarantine, I wanted to touch on quarantine again because obviously we've started to have some quarantines again, and it's brought questions up, even though when Jean and I, and if we engage one of the principals in helping us with phone calls, we explain all of this. And I try to include some messaging in my robocalls for everyone. That being said, we have to recognize that we're in a position right now where variables are being changed. So our county health department has been willing, you know, ahead of a lot of other people, to make a change in the social distance game, you know, going from 6 feet to 3 feet. And for those who are responsible for health in our county and making policy for health in our county, I think, this probably feels a bit risky. And from a scientific standpoint, you have to remember, if you're doing an experiment, how many variables do you touch at once? Not a lot, usually one. And they've actually touched a significant one. It's changing social distance, but it's also changing density of classrooms in the building. So that being said, I did ask Dr. Gupta directly, and this later on the slide, if she was going to be willing to entertain a change in quarantine rules, because right now the guidelines are strongly dependent upon your ability to maintain 6 feet of social distance. So when we're bringing students back into classrooms with 3 feet of distance, the rest of the story. If we have a case in a classroom, we're going back to what it felt like in the fall with lots of quarantining. And her response was, maybe yes, maybe no. A lot will be dependent upon how things trend in terms of the data. And she recommended that we begin keeping data right now in a proactive way so that we won't later have to go back and gather that data to try to prove something to her. So there's guidelines that use 6 feet, obviously, and they change some of the other really important factors are, do we know who is sitting where? So there's some importance of seating charts, which is something that's pretty easy in school districts. We pretty much know where kids are sitting if you don't have a seating chart. Humans are creatures of habit. You walk into a room that you go into every day, everybody sits in the same spot they were in the day before, so not too hard to do. And then there's another strong determinant factor. If the infected person stays asymptomatic the whole time, or do they get symptoms? It's not whether or not they were symptomatic in school. It's whether or not they ever got symptoms or if they stayed symptomatic. Just so you understand, there's a variety of factors, but a huge determinant is that 6 feet. So we're going to see, as I said, increased quarantines. Jean and I are already keeping data. We're tracking cases just like we were before. And after we've had a number of cases, we will be sure to reach out to the county, share our data. I'll encourage other superintendents in the region to do the same. And in the event that we're keeping kids safe at 3 feet and we aren't seeing spread at school, I'm confident that the county will work with us. They have in the past. I don't see why they wouldn't now. Janine?
So in the high school where you have some students that may be eligible for the vaccine, so if a child has received both doses of their vaccine and has gone through that 2-week period, does that change their quarantine? Like if they're in a class quarantine, would they have to quarantine?
No. So it's an incentive if you're comfortable getting your child who's 16 or over vaccinated, it does take them out of the quarantine picture. The only thing that changes that is if they are exposed and become symptomatic. Unfortunately, even if it's not with COVID, I'm going through this right now with a staff member. She was exposed, then 5 days later became symptomatic, tested negative for COVID. She just caught something else, and they still are requiring her to go through the whole quarantine period. So there's things that are happening. There's no absolutes with this. I try to make sense of what I can. I try to seek clarification. Sometimes when I seek clarification, it makes no sense. But that being said, I think people are ultimately trying to do the best they can at the time to keep people safe. So we have had, Mike?
Good question. So a few weeks before the CDC and the state came out with the 3 feet of physical distancing, correct me if I'm wrong, the quarantining rules changed so that an entire class didn't have to quarantine, but only those students that were immediately adjacent.
Correct.
Either side, front and back. That was when it was 6 feet. So did that go away with the collapsing of the physical distancing, or is that still the protocol?
That is still the protocol, except we won't be able to meet the 6 feet anymore once the high school makes its final transition. Right now, they still have that protection, but they're going to keep it at 6 feet. And because we won't be able to have anybody at 6 feet, except an adult who's probably already vaccinated and wouldn't have to quarantine anyway, we will be quarantining classrooms.
So
we've
we'll go
already
back
seen
to,
this.
go back to the entire classroom.
We're going back to the entire classroom. Because they aren't 6 feet, and that you would have to attest that they're maintaining social distance of 6 feet and they're all masked, which I can do if we're still at 6 feet, but we aren't anymore except for the high school. So we've actually had 3 cases, sort of. We had a case that I did a call on in our kindergarten, and 3 days later found out that we had all seen a unicorn, and there was a false positive, which is very unusual. It was a false positive, I think PCR in one case, and in the family there was a variety of situations that were bizarre. But it was determined after multiple tests that there was not a case in the house. And we were able to unquarantine that class and, treat it as a non-case after they had quarantined for a few days. And everyone was quite happy, to get their kindergartners back for as much time as they could. We have now had 2 cases in our 5th grade. And initially I had that moment of the sinking stomach, thinking we'd had our first spread in a classroom, only to find out that our second case actually had a pretty significant exposure in the family. And so I'm quite certain that has to be where it was contracted from, even though the timing overlaps, because of the significance of that exposure and knowing what we're doing here, even at 3 feet, to still keep people safe. So I'm still considering that we're doing okay, and no cases so far, knocking some wood, yet this week. So, and we did athletic testing today and everybody was negative, thank God. So, we actually had a question today, and I know this family emailed everyone on the board. So I thought, why not throw it quickly into the mix of my back to school overview this evening, just because it came up very recently. So I want to refresh your memory on these testing rules. I'm sure we talked about them probably 6 months ago. The reality is, if a child or an adult, especially an adult who's unvaccinated, presents with symptoms attributed to COVID. Now, you and I know that's pretty much every symptom that's attributed to every other illness you could ever get. Cough, fever, runny nose, headache, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, loss of taste, loss of smell. So other than loss of taste and loss of smell, pretty much everything else is for every other, sore throat I didn't put on there. I mean, it's everything you could possibly get. So unfortunately, when you present with symptoms, there is no way to rule out whether or not it's COVID other than to get a test. Jean actually passed out, before some of you got here tonight, a sheet that shows the flow chart that the New York State Department of Health shared with us to follow when we're presented with a situation. So you can take that with you in case you need to refer to it. So what happens is we refer the family to get a test, either to their doctor or to get a test. And they have the opportunity at that point to tell us, hey, my child has a pre-existing condition. A famous one, seasonal allergies, right? That's a pretty typical pre-existing condition that we're seeing a lot of right now. And as long as there is documentation from their physician that they have seasonal allergies with unchanged symptoms, meaning every year at this time, they have a runny nose and they're sneezing. Every year, it's the same thing. If we have that documentation, then there's no reason to send someone for a COVID test. But other than that, migraines is another one. If a child presents with a headache, the parent can document they have migraines, and this is a migraine, I have a migraine, I know what it feels like, my symptoms are unchanged. No need to run and get a COVID test. Sadly, most other things, you're running and getting a COVID test. And that's because you cannot rule COVID out without ruling COVID out. So people are still going and getting tested. They're sending their negative results. Usually symptoms resolve pretty quickly and they're back in school. The other option is that they go to their physician. The physician says, I don't think you have COVID. I think you have the flu. And they give them a flu test. The flu test comes back positive. We are not going to require a negative COVID test for them to return. They'll be able to show positive flu. That's what they had, and we're going to move on. Generally speaking, I think we've had very few people present with flu or present a flu test or strep. Most commonly, people are getting, people are starting to get colds right now. We're seeing a little uptick in viruses, I think, just because it's nicer weather and people are potentially being around more people, but nothing serious, thank God. So if this question comes up from neighbors, community members, here's my advice. Tell them to get in touch at the building level with a nurse or the principal. They can certainly talk to Jean, they can talk to me, we'll walk them through it. So, don't be concerned that you have to come up with it, but this chart is also a really nice.
Is this on our website?
It is probably part of our reopening plan, or if it's
I
under
think it's
our
under COVID updates. We did post it to our
Right.
site at one point. It probably has fallen down in the queue, so we can bring it back up as a good reminder. And I know it was recently updated, this chart, in February.
The biggest issue is obviously when you have little ones, you have a 5-year-old, they get a stomach bug and you're dragging them to get a test, and it's, even a simple rapid test can be, traumatic or scary to them. I think about some of our modified athletes or even our high school athletes, the first time they got tested at school, wondering what's going to happen to me. And Mike and Amanda did a fantastic job of making them comfortable and explaining, but it's still weird. And it's not something in those cases that they do without their parents. Usually their parents are with them at the doctor. So, we've definitely stepped into some interesting territory. So hopefully that'll clear up anything for anybody who's listening, and also that you could carry forward some good information. We are still continuing to have great success with athletics. As you know, short of having to quarantine the football team, we've really had no other issues with any of our sports teams. No quarantining, no positive cases. We did have a positive case in track and field, and they did assess it and decide we didn't have to quarantine anyone because they're outside and because of the distance. We are going through a transition as of now. Our varsity and JV spring season is starting. We'll be doing testing of those folks, and as I said, we're going to have to assess if we have a case on the men's tennis team, or if we have a case on softball. I have no idea how the health department will treat those cases. So just be prepared. It's probably going to result in an initial quarantine of an entire team until we can get someone to rule on it, which will likely take 48 to 72 hours if I had to hazard a guess. So there's going to be some ups and downs. We also, I think Christine did send me a question today from someone in the community regarding mask wearing. Mike was going to do a little additional research, but I didn't hit him with it until this afternoon. The section, may come out with some guidelines, and then our region, the OHSL, has to determine what the protocols will be for the region that will make everyone here feel comfortable moving forward with sports. And so oftentimes those things might be more stringent than what are happening in other areas. So it's likely the OHSL will continue to require masks. And if you think about it, even with baseball, if you're a first baseman, you're good until someone runs to your base. And then you've got to screw around putting your mask on, pay attention to covering the base. If you just had your mask on the whole time, probably be less chaotic. So that's likely what the OHSL ruling will be.
Have all the other sports up till now required mask wearing of athletes?
Yep.
Everyone?
Including wrestling. And
Track, we'll track?
and obviously I've had some people contact me that, sometimes while kids are playing, their mask slips down. Is it 100% perfect? No, but we're doing a really good job, and we've kept everyone safe. We've had no spread on these teams. Things are going in a good direction. We're going to continue to remind. We were reminding kids in the sports study hall today too. They're excited and they're playing, and I think everybody's mental health is in a much better place as a result of it. And we're going to continue to be diligent and keep things going. Mike, I didn't want to cut you off if you had anything to add. I also didn't want to put you on the spot.
Well, since I have the floor, if you don't mind. So we just ended the varsity JV fall 2 season. We had some great results. The football team, so 3 games that we did get to play. One game, we absolutely annihilated West Hill, which is always awesome to do. And then the other two games, we lost by 1 point, and that's not a bad season. And I could go into all the details why. And we have a ton of kids on the team, more than we thought. We didn't end up with a GP because we didn't think we were going to have enough. But all that stuff aside, getting as many people in as possible as you possibly can, and safely, and losing the two games that we lost by 1 point is a great season. Both of our indoor track teams that we ran outdoor, yes, they did have masks on, but all the time they were out there running. They were both 4-0 this fall 2 season, which is outstanding. So we have 2 undefeated teams, and we have a third undefeated team in our fall 2 season with the volleyball team. And they not only stopped West Hill's 44-game win streak at West Hill earlier in the season, on Friday night, they were like a phoenix. I couldn't come up with, like, maybe it's a Pegasus phoenix, so it's at least a horse with wings. But they lost the first 2 games in the match, and I was in my office meeting with a parent and some coaches, and I came up with about 10, 12 points into the third game, and it was back and forth close, and they won the third game. And then they won the 4th game, and then we won the 5th game to beat West Hill again at home on Friday night, remain undefeated. So it's outstanding season so far. And I'm thinking that moving into this spring varsity and JV season, we're going to see some awesome things this spring season as well. So we will, just by the way, with the mask situation, because we are opened up a little more than we were in any of the other seasons so far this year, we will be playing games against teams that are in other leagues and in other areas and regions which may not have the same requirements for mask wearing that we have. Most of the sports that we will be competing with in those sports are going to be low to moderate risk sports, so the risk of spread is going to be minimal. But we may see with the spectators some situations that are a little bit different as we're moving forward. We're going to maintain our mask wearing with all of our sports teams that we have throughout the year. And I'm sorry it took so long, but I thought it was good to mention all that stuff.
So because I can tease Mike, I asked him to comment on mask wearing, and you can see how proud he is of what just happened, that he took the opportunity to share all that wonderful stuff. So thank you, Mike, for that. So we're still negotiating our spectator situation. I am grateful that we're back outside and we can at least invite some spectators to our campus. If you'll notice, any of the guidance that comes out regarding, like today, I got my daily COVID update from the governor, and very careful to say they're expanding stadium capacity for professional and collegiate sports. And high school is really being left behind. I'm continuing to try to advocate because I'd really like I'd like to see us go to 50% stadium capacity. Even the 200, outdoor gathering, if we were to try to find a way to use that, because our guidance from New York State about athletics is pretty clear. It's 2 per athlete, 2 per participant. And so even using 200, if you think about our football team, by the time we had our football team, which had close to 50 students on it, plus their 2 parents, plus the visitors, the team and their 2 parents, we exceeded 200. So to me, it only makes sense we did that safely, and we had plenty of room in that stadium, to even increase it beyond that. And honestly, this is really important to our high school students, that they can go and support their friends. In fact, John Durkee had a couple students come to him with a letter that he and I helped them clean up some parts that they'll be sending off. I've advocated for this. I'm going to have to do it again. But right now, at least we can have someone there. I'd like to be able to have grandma, grandpa, the younger sibling.
Michelle, what would 50% capacity of that stadium be approximately?
Mike, I think you did some kind of a calculation, or Mike and John, maybe even last year at graduation, you had a number.
Yeah, John, you would have to tell him. I mean, all I know is that when I marked out every 6 feet, every other row, we have, well, we're approaching 250, and that's without even marking the center section. So my guess would be, it would be close to 500.
That's.
500 would be 50%?
500 would be about 50%, I understand.
Well, that's an estimate, it's probably a really good one.
Right. Okay.
So I'm gonna continue to advocate, it's really important to the kids, and I don't know if we'll be able to move the line on this, but it's worth a shot. So that's all I have, just on all things COVID and how it's impacting our schools. I don't know if anybody else had additional questions. Okay.
All right, next presentation, budget planning update.
So Tony and I will sort of tag team this one. First and foremost, Tony put in a reminder at the top of the slide. You have so many materials that have been shared throughout this whole entire time. So please continue to refer to them. And there's other information in the packet for this time that you can refer to. This is sort of like a high level overview. And I joked earlier that in my video today, Tony and I did 2 videos today, the first being a little bit of information about the budget. That'll probably be out midweek, probably Thursday. I don't know if it'll be out Wednesday, maybe. And I started by saying today was, Monday, April 12th. So hopefully people will still listen to me after they hear that. I don't even know what the date is. So obviously the state legislators did finalize their budget, and we got our aid runs a little bit later than normal, but not bad. And obviously all of us were pretty shocked with the outcome. We were really preparing for the worst, but Tony and I have taken, the same approach we took every year. We aren't going to create panic until there's a reason to, because all it does is detract from the attention we give kids, and we're not willing to have that dynamic happen here. So I'm really glad that we kept the panic between him and I in our office and didn't panic anyone else, because there was a little bit of much ado about nothing. So as you know, there was an increase in aid to schools. And when we talk to you about aid, remember the thing that we're always focused on is that aid category called foundation aid. Foundation aid is that non-categorical aid. It's not an expense-driven aid, but it's an aid that when you get an increase, it's an actual increase in revenue. It isn't because you spent more in that area and so you're getting more aid. So that was a big deal across the state. And you can see in our region alone, there were increases in foundation aid ranging from 3% to 29.7%. So there are some districts that were bathed in foundation aid. And unfortunately, guess where our increase is? The 3%. And that largely has to do with the fact that we're in a hold harmless situation, because we have experienced enrollment decline, in the past several years. And that enrollment decline is enough that if they ran the formula, we would have a decrease in our foundation aid. So we're being held harmless, and they guaranteed there would be an increase for everyone, including those held harmless. Tony, can you talk a little bit about why 3%, what the calculation figures were? Not the 2% and then the sparsity.
Oh, sure. There were 211 districts in the state that are deemed held harmless. So yes, as Michelle said, we are one of them. Of the 211, I don't have the numbers of either 2 or 3%, but those that received only a 2% increase in foundation aid didn't have what's referred to as a sparsity factor within their district. The sparsity factor has to do with geographic size. And so because we're large geographically compared to many other districts in the state, we have a sparsity factor. It's very small. A district like Central Square is massive geographically. A district like Camden, massive. So those are the districts that, if they're not held harmless, also do receive significantly higher increases in aid than a district like Marcellus that's smaller than them geographically. So our sparsity factor it's negligible. but it's just enough to get us that additional 1%, which in our case is worth around $70,000. So we'll take it. We're very happy to have that expressing factor assigned to us.
So, listen, thinking about what position we were going to be in this year, this is a much better position. So it is what it is, and we're content.
Just to clarify, what type of a district, if there is, and I don't know, maybe this is oversimplifying, would be at the 29% end of that increase?
So I can tell you which district that is. It's Lincourt. And so if Lincourt is not being held harmless, meaning that if the formulas were to run, they would receive an increase in aid. Not only are they not held harmless, but they also are I guess, higher in the poverty index scale. And what other factors, I don't know. I didn't educate myself on what would have netted a district a much larger increase, but I can say with pretty high degree of certainty it's going to have to do with wealth. Wealth factor.
And is the whole save harmless based on enrollment?
Yes.
Ours is.
Only on enrollment?
No, our situation, everybody that's pulled harmless has some factor in the formula that would reduce their foundation aid. In our case, that is enrollment. I can guarantee probably most of the districts in that position aren't because they got suddenly wealthier, but wealth is a huge determining factor in a community. So if a community all of a sudden became super wealthy and their foundation aid was based on a more impoverished situation, they would also be in a hold harmless. I think most of us in the situation, it has to do with enrollment, but you can see, listen, there's very few districts in the state of New York that have held their enrollment. Very, very few. And probably just about 0% have had an enrollment increase.
I think
You know,
Lincourt is one of them, one of the very few in the county that has had an increase. I saw a story on it. And I think most of the school districts in Onondaga are declining.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's a statewide dynamic.
Yeah.
It's not just here. So to Christine's point, it's not 100%, but it's darn close. And as a result, the huge determining factor in whether or not you ended up, in this case, getting much more than 3% probably has to do with changes in poverty. While we've had some change, it hasn't been significant enough.
So you said there's 211 school districts that are being held harmless,
Correct.
and there's about 700 in the state, correct?
Yes.
So a little more than 25% are being held harmless, which gets them an increase, even though a minimal increase, and yet foundation aid increased by a pretty hefty 6.5%.
So yeah, 7.6%. Yep. So yeah, a district like Fayetteville-Manlius saw a significant increase in foundation aid.
Even though 211 districts really should be getting less.
Oh yeah, I understand. Yes, I.
You know what I'm saying?
Correct.
So
Yep,
we
you're right.
should be getting less, and yet that's a pretty big increase.
I'm very happy with the
Correct.
way the state budget worked out for Marcellus. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's the context that you could cry and say, wait a minute, all we got is 3% and this next door neighbor got 29%. Listen, we're lucky we didn't get a reduction and we should be content. So that's the context of the story.
Yeah, we said in the article that was posted on Facebook and wherever else it finds its way to, that we're very pleased with our legislators this year, and also because of fully funding foundation aid. That's a huge deal for all districts throughout New York State. These are dollars that were promised to districts back in 2008, and so there are many districts in the state that have been living, what's the term, hand to mouth, or paycheck to paycheck. So they're finally fully funding that formula, which is great. And yeah, I guess just to come back full circle, I think we fared very well, and it's shocking, but good.
So the other probably big shock in the aid run was that there were allocations made for universal pre-kindergarten. And we were one of the districts that had an allocation, which was shocking. So we're going to actually talk about that a little bit later in the agenda, and I can give you some more information just about how that money works. In addition, one of the things that's been thrown on the table the last few years is taking all of those expense-based aids and mushing them into one category, which is something that school districts do not want because of what we believe it will lead to, which is ultimately a diminishment in aid. So I have a belief that it's a pretty solid political tactical move because all of us converge on that one thing. You know, it's a great distractor, and it will continue to be a great distractor if it's still put on the table. But again, it didn't make it into the final cut, and our expense-based aids are still left in their regular categories. So our budget, if we just take a look at the overview, our budget to budget increase is 1.6%. Our property tax levy cap formula netted, you know, our 2% cap came out to be 1.74%. Our proposed budget relies on going out with a 1.74% increase. And our budget includes reductions of 3 positions. These positions are largely enrollment and section based. So John's sectioning at the high school, he's starting to see some of the reduced class sizes moving into the secondary level. And we also have the ability next year to reduce a section K6 and still function well. So that's where we sit with the overall budget. There's a lot of questions out there. I'm going to have Tony really dig into this piece, but there's a lot of questions out there about all this federal money that has been granted to states, and questions about, you know, why we can't just, you know, reduce taxes, use this money and reduce taxes. And there's a couple of reasons. One, this is a one-shot revenue source. And 2, while we have a little bit of information about how it can be spent, we don't have a lot of information on how it can be spent. So it would be really difficult for us to capitalize on using any of this money as replacement revenue to support our budget this year. And we may not decide to do that in the future, or we might. So I'm going to have Tony talk to you just a little bit, sort of at a high level, about this federal money.
So you can see the allocations that are shown here. So Marcellus, in short, is going to receive roughly $3.1 million over the next 3.5 years or so. Or sorry, currently 2.5 years, but in all likelihood will be extended to 3.5 years. And so as we said in the video today, when the federal government distributes funds, and think about the magnitude of dollars that are being distributed throughout the country, they don't just drop a bag of money on their doorstep and say, have fun. They'll put some pretty stringent requirements. They'll attach some stringent requirements to these funds. And there'll be a process that we have to go through to apply for them. So the first step, as you can see in the last bullet, is that we'll have to post a plan on the district's website by July 1st. I'm going out on a limb here. I didn't mention this to Michelle today, but my guess is that they're probably going to extend that date because districts are going to find it to be very difficult to figure out how to spend, in our case, $3.1 million over the next 2 months. There's a lot of discussion that needs to take place. You have to develop the plan. We need to seek input from interested parties. So there's a lot that we would have to do between now and then. And here's the other caveat, is that we haven't actually received the guidance yet. So it's sort of interesting that they put this date out there. I think it's rather ambitious, so we'll see how that unfolds. I did mention here under the American Rescue Plan Act that 20% of the 1.7 million or 340,000 needs to be targeted to address learning loss. And so I know Michelle and Jean and whomever else have been talking a little bit about the programs that we might implement this summer to bring teachers in to develop whatever materials they would need to develop to accomplish that. $340,000, we won't be able to spend that much money in one summer. I highly doubt it. But nevertheless, this is what we know at this time. And as we get more information, we'll continue moving forward. Did you have a question?
Questions about budget.
It's probably the guidance which we haven't received yet, but how will learning loss be determined?
However, you can locally, besides assuming that with the craziness we've had, there's learning loss.
Hardly can hear this, I'm trying to make sure I'm heard. Yeah, it'll be interesting, because obviously state testing won't net a lot of data, just because not everybody will be taking it. You know, we have some internal data that we've taken, but honestly, I don't personally need a ton of data. I know there's been learning loss. It's just figuring out, you know, we know that we've had to really focus on prioritized standards. We know that there's some standards we haven't been able to give their due, so certainly those. We'll likely have to be doing some assessing internally just to determine where people are ending up, so it's an interesting problem. And honestly, as long as people are healthy and safe, everybody's in the same boat. And we're pretty good usually at plugging holes in schools. It's sort of what we do for a living. So we just have to figure out exactly where the holes are so that we put our efforts this summer into planning to plug those holes. So I think we put together a reasonable package. I did make reference in the video today that if people are still having questions about the revaluation that happened across the town of Marcellus and of the interplay between tax rate, tax levy, and equalization rate, you know, Tony did a quick review of that in today's video, but we also did put out a video previously explaining that, and I just referred people back to that. Just because your assessment goes up doesn't mean, you know, you're going to have a horrific tax situation. You know, it's likely your taxes are going to go up, but it's also going to cause the tax rate to go down. So I think Tony mentioned that letters were sent to households with the town giving some information about tax impact, so people should have that in their hands as well. I don't recall getting one, but I'm going to trust that they were sent.
Did you receive one, Mike?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I got to go back and look at the
Hey,
reminder.
Kelly, did you
I
get?
did.
Okay. Maybe Bob stole it. No, I doubt it. Okay.
Building project update.
So just a quick hit on our current project. We've made some good progress. Just as a reminder, the scope of the project we're currently in was basically turf track, stadium lights, scoreboard, some Fab Lab upgrades to provide an area for welding to occur in the proper area and ventilation, KCH kitchen improvements, largely electric ventilation, and addressing some significant flow issues. So not terribly glamorous, but a dramatic improvement to that space, I think, will be made. So progress so far. The Fab Lab work was completed over one of our breaks. The lighting work was completed. You might have seen the dumpster and things started being thrown in it. And if you were able to be an announcer at one of the football games, you might have noticed how great the new lights are. If you live adjacent to school property, you might have noticed how awesome it is to
That's when you really notice it.
have dark where it's supposed to be dark. So we're starting to see some really good things from that. And I know that the night they were testing the lights, Ryan sent me a cool video showing, you know, how the lights work when there's a
So
touchdown.
focused.
So it's great. Our scoreboard was replaced, so that was an improvement as well and up and running. And, you know, I compliment Ryan for making sure that we took a pretty aggressive approach to get those things done so that they were done out of the way of when the turf will come up and the track resurfacing starts. So we are looking to launch that portion of the project about June 5th. We worked with Mike to make sure that our athletic teams would be out of the way. And we're trying to capitalize on as much of June as we can, obviously, because we have no control over the weather. We had the most glorious summer I've probably ever experienced in my life as a New Yorker, and I've lived here my entire life. I don't know if we'll be blessed again with such small amounts of rain. One can only hope, because rain and bad weather will obviously put a damper, literally, on this work and extend us farther into the fall. We do know right now we're going to go into the fall a little bit on this project. There's a lot of unknowns when you start to roll back turf. We're hoping that it's a pretty straightforward project, like I said, but we already know that likely we will be relocating practices for sure, and probably at least our first couple of games. So fingers crossed that things go smoothly and we end up capturing the majority of our fall season. And then, of course, the kitchen work, once school's out and people are cleared out of the buildings, we'll be able to begin our KCH kitchen work. So just want to make sure you're remembering, because it's weird, because during the pandemic, our attention is so much on many other things that we might forget we have all this amazing stuff yet to happen in this particular project. So several months ago, we talked a little bit about the fact that we are going to be ready for our next project because we do have some debt coming off. And again, we're capitalizing on opportunities to get some needed work done. And next on our list are pavement. Those of you that spend a lot of time either driving or walking around the campus, you're starting to see the same things I am. Roadways and parking lots are starting to break up. There's a lot of cracking. There's some potholes forming. And I can tell you from experience in a previous district, once you start having potholes, you can patch them, but the next year they're back and bigger. And it just becomes a game of patch, patch, patch until you get to the point where you could literally lose a fourth grader in the potholes, which is not, that'll sell a project, but it's not a great situation for people's vehicles. We also do have roof replacement work on all three buildings. And if you remember, a couple of years ago, we did a comprehensive look at the age of all those roofs. And that's when we actually started talking about this project, when we looked at the life of roofs. So largely the high school roof, most of it, parts of the KCH roof and the DMS roof. So Tony, can you just refresh our memory a little bit about how we look to finance this project and sort of the philosophy we've been using and will use going forward?
Sure. So back in 2013, I'm sure Ryan, perhaps Mike, were part of facilities at the time when we developed our debt replacement schedule. And since that time, we took a sort of a modified approach and realized that 15 years ago, the amount of work that we could have done, for example, then for $10 million, say 15 years ago, you can do a lot less work today. And so, the whole thought here is to maintain our facilities. We thought that it was appropriate to add an inflationary factor into that debt replacement schedule. So we now apply a 3% inflationary rate. And so this is the tool that that we're currently using to project out when the community would vote on building projects. And so the next point, as you see here, is a vote in December of 2021 that would cause the financing of that project to come on the district's books in 2024. So we know that it takes a long time for these projects to go from inception to completion, is roughly a 3-year period. So hence the December vote date.
So that, if we start with a December 2021 vote on this project, that means that if you back a couple months up to September 2021, this would be the time where it would come in front of the board to approve that vote to happen, and the referendum that would be placed in front of the voters. So that's our plan at this point. So between now and then, we're going to continue to flesh out scope a little bit, and you're going to see us talking about this building project over and over, although it isn't a terribly complex one. Still want to make sure it's on your radar and also the public's radar going forward. And we did do a video on this today. I don't think I screwed up any dates in that video, and that should be out by the end of the week, just to keep it on the minds of our community. Any questions about building project?
I just have a quick question. So before it would come before the board and before it would come before the vote, you would have bids and all of that information? No?
You might think so.
Okay.
That's a great question. So in the private sector, yes, you figure out what you want to do. You bring in the architects, you design all your stuff, you get your financing, and you start building. Here, that process that you just described for this project would cost us about, say, $400,000. So if we were to spend $400,000 and the voters were to say no,
Okay.
we're out $400,000.
So just getting the bids costs 400?
It's the designing.
The design,
Yeah.
the bids.
So
okay,
when we put this project up for a vote, it's concept.
Okay,
That's the way they've all been.
okay,
High school, the one we're working on now. So we work with the architect, they get someone to do estimates, we work with our construction manager, they get estimates. And these are high-level estimates, they're not detailed estimates.
Yeah.
And so that process happens, and then that gives us an idea of what we think the dollar figure needs to be for the overall project. They're conservative numbers, so that hopefully we don't run into a mess, you know, taking into account the bid climate at the time and, you know, many other factors. Only once you have voter approval can you actually expend the money to design a project and then go out for bid. So, yeah, it's kind of, we've had some confusion over the past 5 years. We've had to explain this a number of times because it seems weird.
and the reason I ask is I was just thinking about that, I know that now there's a huge range in costs in materials and, you know, things like that, so, but that's helpful to understand that, thanks.
That's a very good question, and you are about the 100th person to ask it. So there's a lot of sense in doing all the design first.
Yeah,
If we had the resources.
Yeah.
We don't get the resources until the voters say yes.
and that makes
And you
sense.
certainly don't want to design something the voters don't want.
Right,
I mean, even though you think roofs and pavement are pretty straightforward, projects get voted down sometimes.
Yeah.
So. Now the moment you've all been waiting for. So I said earlier when we were talking about our budget, that we had this surprise UPK allocation on our aid run, and this is usually a more competitive process, money being allocated to communities that have more fiscal need, if you will, you know, places where families may be in poverty, and that will drive funding for UPK. Certainly, New York City has seen a massive uptick over the past 5 years in funding for full-day UPK for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. So we were surprised to receive the money, but felt like it was a real opportunity for us to talk about. So just to explain a little bit, actually, I should shut up because Jean is really taking the lead on this, and although I have in-depth knowledge of it, so is she. So Jean, do you want to talk us through this UPK info?
Yep, so, you know, as Michelle said, it was a surprise. In fact, as you likely saw on Syracuse.com, we barely had a minute to digest it before we had some inquiries already from parents. So the allocation, as Michelle said, is usually a competitive grant, and now it's considered an allocation. Based on what I know from the Office of Early Education, they did assure me that this money's not going to all of a sudden go away. So if we get started, initially the money is being funded by the federal government for the first 2 years. The third year, it's going to be a mix between the federal government and the state government. And then in the fourth year, it is going to be purely funded by the state government under the millionaire's tax.
Fourth and
Beyond.
Okay.
Yep. And so, you know, I have the assurance that they are committed, New York State, and, you know, as you see in the news, many governments and the federal government are committed to this UPK and early education. So I'm confident that the rug won't get pulled from under us. The allocation of 147,000 approximately is for 25 participants. And what we're proposing is a class size of 18, because with a class size of 18, you would have 1 teacher and 1 teaching assistant. The way that the budget works, and we'll kind of get into that, if you're not going to have 25 participants, they chop off based on the number of participants that you have. So basically, if we had more that, if we did a class size of 25, it becomes cost prohibitive for us. So we proposed the number 18.
It also makes little sense to put 25 4-year-olds in a room.
Right.
We don't even do that at kindergarten. Right.
So students that are eligible for this are 4 years old as of December 1st. So it is possible that we would have some 3-year-olds if they're 3 in September, but turning 4 by December 1st. And then the allocation, if you'll see up there, the allocation for 18 slots that we would get if that's what we end up doing would be $106,000. There would be some local funding that we would need, because remember, we have a full-time teacher and a teaching assistant. So we're estimating about $50,000 of local funding for probably staffing, as well as need for furniture and just the room setup. And we're assuming that we'll be able to use some of our federal funding for that as well. One thing that's an interesting nuance to this is the regulation that 10% of the money that we receive must be set aside for a community partner if we have any interested community partners. And with that, there's some regulations. The community partner one has to commit to becoming certified, so becoming a certified UPK teacher, and that has to be done within 5 years. So there are regulations too involved in the standards. They have to follow the standards and the curriculum set forth by the district. If we do not have any community partners that are interested, in collaborating with us, then we can complete a waiver so that that money would just come back to our program here.
So Jean, when you say community partner, you mean like a local daycare or?
Could be.
Or what,
Yeah,
what
and
are
it's
some?
usually within the geographic
Local
area.
preschool, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
Right, so we have some great preschools and great daycares in our community for sure. I'm not sure if we have anyone in our community that wishes to become, an extension of a universal pre-kindergarten, make sure that they have a New York State certified teacher and follow a set curriculum, because they literally have to mirror what we're doing here.
Mhm.
That's a little bit more of a stretch. My past experience is that in bigger areas that have some center-based programs, often you have a community partner. When you have programs similar to what we see in the Marcellus community, you typically don't find a partner. That's not to say that we wouldn't.
Mhm.
We would certainly seek that, because it's part of the grant. But like I said, generally it doesn't happen.
And the UPK would be at that location, most likely, the community partner.
You would actually push 10% of the funding to them to cover some of their program costs.
Oh, okay.
But the 18 would still be here.
The 18 would be
Right.
here, okay.
And interesting, Jean, you had something to add that, if we had 18 here.
And yes, we could, if we had 18 here and we had 7 there, we could take all of the funding, right?
I see,
So we
okay,
can take all of the funding and have those 7 slots at our community partner.
I see.
So
But in essence, you're pushing the
That
money
kind of
there.
pays
It's
for
not,
itself.
right, it's not changing our situation financially, but it would be helping their financial
Sure.
situation if we had a program that was interested in doing that.
And
So-
that part would be it would be a competitive request for proposal. And
Mhm.
So if a preschool or a daycare was interested in becoming a partner, they would have to provide a 5-day-a-week with the same duration
Yes.
and follow the
Has to be
same curriculum.
180 days.
So I would think therein lies the
We have
biggest
to mirror
challenge
the program
for,
here.
Yeah.
right. And we can't do this in 2 half-time programs then to allow 36 students.
We can,
Technically, we can, yeah.
yeah.
You could? Okay.
Technically, we could. My own personal feeling is a half-day program poses a challenge for parents with transportation and, just a working setting. I think that's.
Is there going to be so I know that there would be some kind of lottery system for interested parents, but given that you could have, like you said, 3-year-olds coming because they would be eligible, for kindergarten on that December 1st timeline, you could conceivably have little ones in school all day with pull-ups.
Right.
So is that a contingent of being eligible, that they have to be fully potty trained and we don't provide that additional assistance? Is that going to be stipulated?
Yeah, that's something that we have to resolve at this
Yeah.
point. I don't, again, I talked to the director at New York State Ed, but a question like that is not something that he would even imagine. So I think
That would
that's
be a
more.
local choice.
Yeah, right.
And then also with the space capacity of where would we put this if we were interested in pursuing it? And in the fall with, this kind of I mean, I'm sure we'll still have COVID restrictions and certain things, like will space and, you know, when you figure these kids also have to be eating lunches and barriers and all that kind of good stuff, like from a logistics standpoint, what would you?
Logistically, it's gonna be Mr. Montgomery and I working closely together to figure out spacing, but I do think it's certainly doable at KCH with a classroom of 18. But yeah, all of those COVID restrictions, we would need to.
Where would the
consider
classroom be? Because I can't imagine you have an empty one. So what would you?
We do have flex space right now, so that we could very easily put it located really close to the main entrance and have 18 students there with their own private bathroom, et cetera. So we could make that work in the very front of the building.
If you remember, we had fourth grade in that building, and we hemmed and hawed about whether to keep them there because we were really tight when they were there. But when they're not there, we had some spaces that we could reallocate to people that were sort of shoved in a closet, but we also ended up with some spaces that we could collapse very easily.
And have you already gotten a handle on, I'm sure that when this news became public, you've got some phone calls from parents that probably in favor of and opposed to. But what's your, like, you know, your feel of, would 18 suffice the, you know, for the need that's out there? Would it be tough to fill 18? Like what, how would you
Yeah,
gauge
it's
that?
a good question. So Michelle, the next slide is we're kind of getting into, I think, our next steps. I mean, right now, we sort of just inquired to figure out, you know, logistically and give you enough information to decide as a board what you think. But I think our next steps would be doing a parent survey, because really, we have had parents inquire mostly in favor, you know, are you gonna do this? It's hard to say for absolute certainty until we poll the community.
I actually got a call from Assemblyman Hunter's office today. A parent had reached out to her just wanting to make sure she was going to advocate for this or continue to advocate for it as well. And, you know, so they called me today to let me know that our district had their support if we chose to proceed, and wanted to ask me a few questions about it, said they would stay in touch if there was something that we needed that they could provide, which I thought was gracious if they took the time to reach out.
Michelle, would the applicants be children with IEPs? Would they be considered for this program also?
They can be, yes, for sure. It's literally any community resident, you know, with a child that meets the age requirement. You can't pick and choose, you know, it is a lottery-based situation. And, you know, anybody who does a UPK is in the same boat, you know, that you are pulling names out of a hat. And your hope is that you have enough slots for the need. Some programs have wait lists, some don't, you know, just depending on where you end up as a community. But yeah, it could be students with IEPs, it could be students from poverty, students not from poverty, you know, it'll be just like any other regular classroom with a good mix.
So, you know, again, with your support, I think we put out a survey and get a sense of what the community, if there is that need or desire. From that point, if we decided to move forward, we would submit an application. So even though it's allocated in the aid, we still would have to submit a application, which would need to get approved.
It's sort of like submitting our plan.
Right.
You know, we call it an application, but it's really, they want to make sure we have a plan that will comply with the rules.
Yeah. And then from there, hire and set up the classroom. But I mean, I think we hope for a September 1st target date. And based on my discussion today, it sounds like it would be feasible. We could do it in September. We would just have to start planning.
Yeah, the gentleman actually shared with Jean that we can proceed, like, there isn't, no one's gonna say no. That they might tell us to tweak our plan, but we could proceed with planning and hiring and getting the room ready so that we could be ready to go in September, which I thought was encouraging.
And Jean, would you be reaching out to our local preschools? Because I'm sure that this is going to, it could potentially have an impact. And we can make sure that probably, I would think that you'll still have many parents that feel that their child, you know, they don't want them in a full-time
Monday through Friday program. So hopefully the need will still be there for our local preschool and that enrollment as well. But I know from talking to one of the directors at one of the preschools who was immediately like, oh, what's going to happen to us?
Right.
So I think if you could reach out to them, that would maybe put a lot of worry to the, aside.
No
So
doubt. And I certainly want to reach out to all of them to explain the potential for
Sure.
collaborating with us. And can provide that information for certain.
And it would be 5 days a week, full day,
Yeah.
without an option of 3 days or 2 days or
Right,
half day.
yeah, it has to, and it has to be a 5-hour day.
And transportation?
Transportation, yes, we can transport. I had a little bit of
Hard to
confusion
imagine.
as far as whether the students would need car seats or not. I was under the assumption that they were.
Yeah, they
But
need
the information I got
Yeah.
was contrary, so we still need to investigate that a little bit.
Yeah, they need
Interesting. I didn't even
The
think
person at
about
state
that.
I'm sure they did, Michelle Brantner is very.
Yeah.
Or even if that's not a requirement, I
We
think we want to maybe make it a requirement.
Yeah, you don't have any worry. I was a little shocked.
What does that look like? What does that look like? We send out a bus that has car seats on it?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Probably a smaller bus, right?
Yeah.
And
You can also
there
put
are
them-
car seats? Like we buy car seats, now we have car seats?
You can put them on a regular bus too.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You can put them on a regular bus, you strap, this happens, so this
Yeah.
is not a foreign thing, really.
Oh, I've never,
So,
I've
yeah,
never
you
thought
can,
of that. Okay.
you can put them, in the front of the bus and your bus attendant would strap them in and.
Wow.
Yeah, and certainly, we do not want to put anybody out of business or, cause anxiety.
Right.
But we certainly do want to do right by people who would desire this type of program and help our community partners in, becoming more, understanding of early literacy and emergent readers and what they can do on their part too.
I think if you think about local programming, if I just take 1, 2, 3, and 4-year-olds, okay? 4-year-olds make up approximately 25% of the daycare population. And of that 25%, a fraction of them would be able to take advantage of UPK. And I'm not trying to diminish the impact of losing 1 or 2 4-year-olds from a daycare program because, that's their livelihood. But it isn't, it's not a mass exodus. I think it can be a little bit of a panic, like suddenly we're gonna create a kindergarten and all, 100 of the 4-year-olds in our community are gonna now be at school and not be at daycare. You're talking about 18 kids, so hopefully, Jean will do a great job of communicating with those folks, Janine, and.
There might even be some kids that aren't in a daycare.
Correct.
And I imagine there also has to be some work done and time spent with because I imagine for our K teachers right now, certainly kids come at a varying degree of abilities and readiness. But then when you add this additional component of kids that may have been in-house, prepared, I guess.
Sure.
So there's going to be even a greater sense of disparity. So how do you manage all of that in the following year? So I would imagine there'd have to be some kind of, support for our K teachers to adjust in the implications as we go on. Do you see this being something that if we start this now with one class of 18 in a community like ours, do you think that we will have a need to expand that, or is it just maybe too soon until you take this
I think
survey?
it's too soon, but I think for the time being, we would want to make sure that we're doing it well and, properly
too fast,
servicing
too
the
far,
18 that we have before we would
Yeah.
ever imagine expanding. And again, it is a little too soon to forecast that.
I'd even say until the state takes back over the full funding of this program and
Right,
decide what they can handle, there may not be additional revenue available, and therefore it becomes cost prohibitive, I think, at that point, to be offering increased services, unless you had a dire community need and were willing to channel resources from one area to another. So I think, Janine, you're probably 5 years away from even having a real sense of what could be possible.
And need is not an element of decision. It's
No.
purely a lottery.
Yeah, it's purely lottery. It is not based on need or anything else, or special needs or anything.
Yeah, and that's in the requirement for UPK, It's stated very clearly. So,
And yet, what do you need, what do you need at this point from the board? Keep in mind that there are 2 board members not present that I would like to have some input on this. What do you need from us now?
sure, a nod that this sounds like something that you think we ought to pursue, or a no, we don't want to pursue this, we would rather give back this money. And, Jean, remind me, when is the application going to be out?
In the past, it was out in June or July. They did explain today that they're trying to get it out in May so that schools can have a quicker turnaround than waiting till August for it to be approved. So hopefully May, they're keeping their fingers crossed.
So there's no reason this could not appear on the agenda as just a quick touch base at our May meeting. This is a lot of information tonight, but I wanted to get it in your hands. And then at that May meeting, you could certainly give a nod or a shake of the head no. And then
The other board members good with that, to allow our colleagues to have some input?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
And by then you'll have a survey, feedback from parents.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
I don't know if you want to do that yet.
I would wait, me personally, I would wait until you decide, because you're gonna stir up a lot of things, and I don't wanna lay that at your feet once we've riled everyone up. Because I have a feeling there's gonna be interest, just my God.
I'm very much, I have to say, I'm very much in support of it. I think it would be a great thing for our community, for kids, and I think there's great data behind UPK.
Any other questions? Wow, that's a lot of presentations.
Sorry.
It's all right. Item 4, recognition.
So feel free to add any, but I have some quick ones. We had a great battle of the books. 2 teams competed, a 3rd and 4th grade team. They took second. This was against other regional schools. And then a 5th and 6th grade team that took 3rd place. So super exciting. Kate Shanahan is again working her magic. You've been hearing her name a little bit lately. Also kudos to our coach of the year, Lauren Collister, who's sitting here with us tonight. She had a really exceptional season, and the OHSL All-Stars basketball team was named, and you can see it's the who's who of Marcellus here. Katie McLaughlin was named Player of the Year. Hannah Durand and Emma McLaughlin were named to first team, and then Hannah Regalia, Sam Wynn, and Annabella Mondello and Shannon Keller were all honorable mention. And of course, Lauren was given the honor of Coach of the Year, so huge congratulations to Lauren.
Add to that, Coach of the Year, Section 3, Class B small schools, correct? Or small schools, something like that. Section 3, yeah, I'll see anyone.
I'm just gonna say Coach of the Year for the universe. She's up there with like Aaron Rodgers or somebody. Also, to our 7th and 8th grade staff, last week they had the next heavy lift, including the maintenance and custodial to get them ready. And we got those kids back in 5 days a week. And while they were tired at the end of the week, there were a lot of happy faces. And not just the kids, but the staff were happy too. So thanks to them. We have a new addition to our communications team, and you may notice some changes have been happening with social media. Specifically, Jeremy Hoteling grew up actually in our area, over in the Red Creek area, and he was hired by City BOCES and assigned as part of our communications team. And he's done some amazing things with social media. He's been doing some great videos, and he deserves a little shout out. So you can give him all the credit for the great stuff he's posting. I don't know if any of you have any others, but those are my recommendations.
Moving along, item number 5, resident comments. Are there any resident comments at this time?
No, there
No resident comments. Item 6, business. Roll call for 6.3 vote. As I read your name, please state whether you are present
Or state if we're absent.
or if you're absent, state that too. Michael McCullough, present. Patty Sager. Michael Bristol. Janine Lundergan.
Present?
Kelly Rossiter,
Present.
Christine Shea.
Present.
Item 6.1, adoption of the 2021-22 Marcellus School Budget. Whereas the Marcellus Central School District Board of Education has developed a budget for the operations of the district for the 2021-22 school year. Whereas the annual budget hearing meeting is scheduled for May 10th, 2021. A motion is made by, may I have a motion?
Yes, motion?
Janine? And seconded by
I'll second.
Kelly? That the board hereby adopts the budget developed in the amount of $38,456,593. Be it further resolved that the following proposition be placed before the voters on May 18th, 2021. Shall the Board of Education of the Marcellus Central School District be authorized to expend the sum set forth in the total amount of $38,456,593 for the 2021-22 school year and to levy the necessary tax therefore. May I have a motion?
Yeah, motion, Janine?
Janine, second.
Second.
Kelly? Questions or comments? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Item 6.2, OCM BOCES Board of Education election. Resolved that the Marcellus Central School District casts its votes for 4 vacancies, 1 vote for each vacancy in the annual election of members of the Board of Cooperative Educational Services as per the attached resolution. May I have a motion?
Motion, Christine?
Christine, second.
Second.
Kelly? Comments or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Item 6.3, OCM BOCES Administrative Budget. Whereas the Board of Cooperative Educational Services for the sole supervisory district of Onondaga, Cortland, and Madison counties, the BOCES, duly presented its tentative 2021-2022 administrative budget of $8,938,696 at its 2021 annual meeting. And whereas the board desires to approve said tentative administrative budget, now therefore be it resolved as follows. Section 1, the BOCES tentative administrative budget of $8,938,696 is hereby approved. And Section 2, this resolution shall take effect immediately. May I have a motion?
Motion.
Janine, second by Kelly. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Gift donation to the district. Resolved that the Board of Education, accepts $2,700 from Cornell University Agricultural Incentive Grant for Marcellus School's agricultural program. May I have a motion?
Motion, Christine?
Christine, second.
Second.
Kelly? Comments or questions? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Item 6.5, amendment of flexible spending plan. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the proposed amendment to the district flexible spending plan, allowing participants to carry over unused balances to the plan year ending in 2022. I have a motion.
Motion.
Ellie, second.
Second?
Janine, comments or questions?
Tony, can you explain, like what does that entail and what's that about?
Sure. So these things go by several names, a cafeteria plan or a flexible spending plan or a section 125 plan. So this is the plan document that affords people pre-tax contributions to health insurance, for health insurance premiums, or to a health savings account, or in our case, a flexible spending account. And so because of COVID, The IRS has authorized anyone maintaining one of these plans to allow an unlimited amount of funds to be carried over to the following plan year. And so in order for us to apply any amendment requires your approval.
So would those funds be allowed to roll over or not?
Normally they would be, but only up to $550. And so this
So this
resolution-
amendment is changing that.
Correct. I think that, I think the cap this year is $2,750. So if somebody were to have that full amount unused at the end of the year, they could roll forward the entire amount. Normally it's capped at $550.
It's a big difference.
The reason for this is because if people can't go to the doctor and do normal stuff, then they want, well, we'd like to allow them to carry this.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Item 6.6, calendar amendments for the 2020-21 school year. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the following calendar amendments for the 2020-21 school year. 1 half-day staff development from May 5th to May 7th, and snow day give back, May 28th, 2021. May I have a motion?
Motion?
Kelly? Second?
Second.
Janine?
So is that, just to explain, is that half day changed from the 5th to the 7th?
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, it was put on a Wednesday at the beginning of the year because we had virtual Wednesdays and that was a much better time to do it, less disruption to in-person time. But it just doesn't make sense to plop it into the middle of the week. It's really hard, especially for our younger kids, to have a disruption like that. So it's better on a Friday.
And the snow day give back is contractual item.
It's a contractual item, yeah. We got lucky this year. Of course, we do have some snow coming.
Yeah.
Might be a little early on
It's dramatic.
this. May need that. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Item 6.7, approval of district-wide safety plan. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the updated Marcellus Schools District Safety Plan as presented. May I have a motion?
Motion?
Janine? Second?
Second.
Kelly? Comments or questions? When was this presented?
You have the date?
I do.
It was just the addendum, remember it was
Uh,
just the
February 8th.
pandemic,
February 8th?
yeah. It was just the pandemic portion. And then it had to be posted for 30 days of comment.
Any other questions or comments? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Item 7, personnel. Resolved that the following personnel items be approved. Item 7, excuse me, 7.1 through 7.14. May I have a motion?
Motion?
Kelly? Second?
Christine?
Christine? Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Item 8, consent agenda. Resolved that the consent agenda consisting of the following items be approved. Items 8.1 through 8.7. May I have a motion?
Yes, motion to me.
Janine? Second?
Second.
Kelly? Comments or questions? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Item 9, informational items. Doesn't appear that there are any. 10, any other resident comments? Mr. Snaccio.
No, sir.
Item 11.1, enter executive session. Resolved that the meeting in public be adjourned and executive session be convened for the purpose of discussion of collective negotiations and the superintendent's evaluation. Time is 8:34. May I have a motion?
Motion?
Kelly? Second?
Christine?
Christine? All those in favor?